This summer, I completed a jury rotation as part of the Asian American Arts Alliance and the Museum of Contemporary African Diasporic Art, who together launched a new program called the Bandung 2022 Residency for Artists, Organizers and Activists, Culture Bearers, all working to foster solidarity and understanding between Black and Asian American Pacific Islander communities, the people I come from. And what I found in that experience and in the profoundly sumptuous work produced through it, much of it having to do with environmental justice, is this: there is hope. Not a naive hope or an unstudied hope, an emergent hope, grounded in hard work, mutual labor, an emergent strategy, as Adrienne Marie Brown would say. This is so important because as a young girl in Queens growing up, when I was called the N-word in Korean, when I experienced all kinds of traumas that are too long to discuss now, I simply would have found the prospect of the Bandung 2022 artist residency literally impossible. Maybe it was impossible back then. Somehow, though, impossibilities also lead to possibilities. In other words, even when our communities are vilified and pathologized, when we are attacked and erased, when we are marginalized and pitted against one another and told there is no together horizon, we find the will to risk courage, the courage of hope. As Rebecca Solnit has said, this is not the hope which says everything will be okay. I agree with her because that would be a lie. Our people have already suffered the most unimaginable pain and continue to find ways to stitch the fabric of mutuality and survivance back together. And so here I am with you today to celebrate the courageous hope found in the work of the arts and environmental justice work of the mural arts folks in Philadelphia. I am in awe of the power of public art to tell stories that answer the questions that Grace Lee Boggs asked: what time is it on the clock of the world? That work that you'll be engaging with all week, that work is what solidarity looks like, and it is a blessing. And that is what art can do. It can sing in a different register, keeping us open. The art of hope I speak of accounts for the wounds, the hauntings, the toxic soil and water, the grief and the mourning, the complexities and uncertainties with openness. When we do the work to stay open, and I don't know about you, but for me, this is a daily practice, we make space for ourselves and each other. We create space. This spatial production seems to me to be the key, the secret to surviving in difficult soil. Space allows us to be more deeply together, to practice the revolution that Che Guevara said can only be motivated by great feelings of love. This is how we live in precarious times, because we know how to survive in difficult soil. And sadly, the difficult times will continue. We understand that the story of environmental justice is directly constituted by empire, misogyny, racial capitalism, indigenous genocide, and Christian nationalism. We know that individualizing our struggles is the opposite of what we need. We must have the courage to see love in each other's faces so that we can pick up the pieces together. Because as we know, no one else is coming. What we need is shared resources, caring networks of mutuality, deep solidarity work, and prophetic visioning about our shared futures. Those futures are seeded by a vibrant rejection of the stories which frame Black, Brown, Indigenous, and immigrant and poor people as the problem. And we instead rely on the mutual study of our shared field of struggle. Something as fundamental as art and environmental justice helps build our literacy for seeing and speaking our shared field of struggle. Today is, as you know, the day after September 11th, a day that for many presents profound challenges of many kinds, from grieving death to toxic illness, from occupational harms to displacement and to the violence of forgetting. It can be hard to turn and face the joy of the world. It's also a week after the transition of Queen Elizabeth of England, a global icon of much harm, violence, and depravity, cloaked in ritual, wealth, and tradition. And my friends in Jackson, Mississippi, residents have found themselves in the deeply vulnerable position of experiencing a flood. All of this happening at the same time, a flood that had left the state's capital city, Jackson, without water to drink or fight fires. Keep your mouths closed during showers, is what residents were told. A boil water advisory remains in effect in a majority Black city whose state government is dominated politically by conservative white Republicans. All these and more, flooding in Pakistan, harm and trauma all over the world, all happening at once. And my message to you is, we must, really must learn with, through, and alongside a case such as Jackson, Mississippi. It can be a portal to understanding, mutuality, solidarity, and transformation. The situation in Jackson is not only many decades in the making via racial capitalism. We know that in the context of climate change and extreme weather events like this 14 inches of rain that they received, it's also an outcome of a long history of racist and structural dispossession and oppression that is interconnected with the exploitation of people and places all around the world. From the dredging of canals for ports, to the history of the Mississippi River, to the regular flooding experience in many parts of the state. This is no brand new horror. And this case experience replicates around the world in vulnerable communities of color. White flight from urban Jackson, Mississippi to outer suburbs can be understood, yes, as one slice of the resource challenge when we're thinking about the extensive, expensive, regular upgrades that old water infrastructure requires. But in this capital city, or any capital city, we know that it isn't simply the physical infrastructure that frames the path dependency of this moment. We know that Mississippi is a state government that has historically been hostile to Black life, as well as Indigenous life and immigrant and poor life. Because what is happening in Jackson isn't very different from the lead-influenced water crisis or in other places around the world. People are suffering. They're being sickened right now as we talk. And they've been written off by a white power political infrastructure that, again, often struggles to see the inherent dignity of life, of Black life. This inherent dignity is what the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991 defined as the following: the basic foundation for environmental justice. These principles of dignity included the right to be free from ecological destruction, discrimination, or bias, the right to sustainable use of lands and resources, and protection from toxic or hazardous wastes, the fundamental right to clean air, land, water, and food, the right to self-determination, the demand for strict accountability and compensation for environmental harm, the right to participate in decision-making, and the right to a safe and healthy work environment without being forced to choose between working in unsafe conditions and being unemployed. And finally, the demand that employers comply with environmental rights under international law around the world. My friend and mentor Malkia Davidge-Cyril says that our job is to remember through action through witness, these very principles outlined back in 1991, and to make the memory a witness of power and perspective, so that our witness shouts a hopeful fury that moves us toward freedom. Max says we cannot give into their desire for us to atrophy, but that instead we must engage the action of bearing witness. Different scholars have named this kind of witness with different terms: recognitional justice, structural justice, distributive justice, procedural justice, corrective justice, and yes, social justice. The late Mississippi scholar Clyde Woods understood the nature of this witness, understood what Mac was saying. Circling back to Mississippi, Clyde Woods, in his magisterial work that I write and teach a lot about, the book is called Development Arrested: The Blues and Plantation Power in the Mississippi Delta. Clyde Woods, may he rest in peace, he reframes the 2 centuries-old conflict between African Americans and planters, the plantationocracy, in the Mississippi Delta, examining how plantation domination of politics and economy in the region remains in existence today, together with the continuing resistance of the African American working class to these systems' depredations. Woods introduces a very important concept. That concept is called blues epistemology. Epistemology simply means how you know what you know. So a metaphor might be the glasses you wear. I see what I see because of these glasses. We are all wearing epistemological glasses. We may be unconscious to our epistemology, but it's there and we're using it all the time. Clyde wanted us to think through a blues epistemology. He wanted us to reframe what we know about surviving against all odds. Using a Black geography's framework to foreground how Black and racialized subjects are not marginal, but central to the production of space, he talked about the blues as a Black social theory of space. Woods shows us how the oral tradition of the blues counteracts the hegemonic demand for the expert. He shows us that the blues as a Black social theory of space that literally produces space, breath, mourning, joy, strategy, marronage, meaning escape and freedom. He shows us how Black spatial production is made possible in precisely the places that we were told are invisible or forgettable. He shows us the lie and the truth through blues epistemology. He asserts that Black communities have understood place as the location of cooperation, stewardship, and social justice, rather than just as sites where we are dominated, enclosed, commodified, exploited, and segregated. There is more to Black life than these atrocities. In other words, we are not marginal, but central to the production of space. And what could freedom possibly be other than the production of space? Unearthing how the past and the present are interconnected through memory work, through witness and action, going back to what Max said. This is what the blues have taught us about the production of space, about moving toward freedom. We are blues people and a blues nation if we do the work to remember. The art of mourning is big, profound art. Art as the arms and expression of the spirit of the blues. Art as call and response, just like the blues. This is how we supersede the so-called rationality of the expert and the chosen ones. We remember that we are not Queen Elizabeth. We remember and practice how to make space and produce space together through wedding and war until freedom. The disparities in the grievability of our vulnerable and frontline communities demands witness, active witness, not bystander witness, active witness that demands memory work so that we can write ourselves into the future. Witness that knows what it knows through the blues. Mac called this a spirit-moving witness. And also Mac recently said something so profound to me this Sunday. They said it was to never forget that the wedding exists inside the war. Bombs can be falling. There's Agent Orange in the soil. We are suffering. There's trouble in the water. People remain on the run. But we're also simultaneously building right relationship with each other. We are undoing our conditioning. We are building real friendships and a shared capacity to fight together, to witness each other, and to be living memorials and tender warriors insisting on a collective future. In close, I want to leave you with some additional provocations to blues epistemology, which again is a Black social theory of space. I want to link that vision from Clyde Woods to the brilliance of Vandana Shiva's book, Earth Democracy, where she lists 8 important principles, and I'm going to read those principles, and I hope that together they will spark some really cool ideas for our Q&A. And so I'm reading from this book, Earth Democracy. Principles of Earth Democracy. And you may not be surprised that they very much align with the 1991 principles on environmental justice. Number 1, all species, peoples, and cultures have intrinsic worth. In other words, all beings are subjects who have integrity, intelligence, and identity, not objects of ownership, manipulation, exploitation, or disposability. No humans have the right to own other species, other people, or the knowledge of other cultures through patents and other intellectual property rights. Number 2, the Earth community is a democracy of all life. We are all members of the Earth family, interconnected through a fragile web of life. No humans have the right to encroach on the ecological space of other species or to treat them with cruelty and violence. Number 3, diversity in nature and culture must be defended. Biological and cultural diversity is an end in itself. Biological diversity is a value and a source of richness, both materially and culturally, and they create the conditions for sustainability. They create the conditions for sustainability. Number 4, all beings have a natural right to sustenance. All members of the Earth community have a natural right to sustenance. Resources vital to that sustenance must stay in the commons. These rights are not given by states or corporations, and nor should they ever be extinguished by a nation state or corporate action. Number 5, Earth democracy is based on living economies and economic democracy. Economic systems in Earth democracy protect ecosystems and their integrity. In the Earth economy, there are no disposable people or dispensable species or cultures. 6, living economies are built on local economies. Living economies are diverse, they're decentralized. The localization of economies is a social and ecological imperative. Earth democracy is based on vibrant local economies. In Earth democracy, the global economy does not destroy and crush local economies, nor does it ever create disposable people. Number 7, Earth democracy is a living democracy. Living democracy is based on the democracy of all life and the democracy of everyday life. In living democracies, people can influence the decisions over the food we eat, the water we drink, and the healthcare and education we have. Living democracy grows like a tree from the bottom up, organized on principles of inclusion, diversity, and ecological and social responsibility. In other words, what love looks like in public. And finally, actually there are 10, not 8. 8, Earth democracy is based on living cultures. 9, living cultures are life nourishing. And 10, Earth democracy globalizes peace, care, and cooperation by connecting people in circles of care, in circles of cooperation and mutual compassion, instead of dividing through competition, conflict, fear, and hatred. Earth democracy globalizes sustainability through compassion and justice. And so I'm going to leave you with that. And I look forward to your questions, your observations. And thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mia, for sharing your wisdom and for doing the dance and weaving everything in such a short period of time, allowing us and inviting us to see. For folks on this call, some folks may know, and it might be new to others, this symposium is the culmination of over 2 years of efforts by activists, artists, scholars, and environmental justice experts across the United States. Specifically, we've been working with partners in Kern County, California, Ogapoge, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Austin, Texas. We met with them monthly, sometimes multiple times a month, as they explored issues in their communities and designed moments and experiences of collaborative participatory public art to reflect on and meet the needs of their communities at the intersection of environmental justice, where we know that communities of color are hit first and worse by extractive industries. All of our partners are currently wrapping up their amazing projects, but I just wanted to share that during those 2 years, the moments of start and stop in reflection and in relation to COVID and how the frontline communities that were dealing with extractive oil industries, redlining, so many conversations that were already front of mind. COVID really disrupted so much of the momentum, and just witnessing the way the activists and artists and practitioners had to pivot to relate with their communities through care and mutuality and direct moments of mutual aid was so beautiful. And it really is reflective of what Mia was sharing. I wanted to ask some of the questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A box and ask for you all to submit them at this moment. I have a question for you, Mia, from Q&A. The question is, are you able to speak more around active witnessing and memory work, the link between them in particular?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I tend to respond to this question first thinking about the work of Winona LaDuke. who is just a very special person, a special human being, and is an Indigenous environmental justice warrior, spiritual warrior, that I met many years ago, many years ago at an environmental justice conference. And I love to talk about Winona's book, Recovering the Sacred. And in that book, she opens the book by asking, how do we know what is sacred? I offer this as a partial answer to your question about memory work. One thing that she asks the reader is, how does a community heal itself from the ravages of the past? That is the question that she is grappling with. And what she outlines is, through an exploration of what is sacred, she and we end up engaging in the kind of deep memory work that changes the ways that we understand space around us. The way changes the way that we understand the meaning of a street, the meaning of the name of a street, the meaning of the name of this place, a national park, the meaning of this waterway, by recovering the sacred or reframing away from hegemonic discourse and hegemonic memory. By doing this kind of rememorializing work, we kind of create a counter narrative that changes our own internal conditioning. And through mutual study, in other words, with other people, we end up in sort of a collective project of counter cartography or counter narrative, where we are understanding space differently. So we're in the same space, but because we're understanding it differently through this memory work, the space suddenly seems different. And we create more space in ourselves, more possibility, because it can be profound to think, how is it that I've lived on this street, as an example, all my life and never knew that a river runs underneath it, and that the Lenape-Hoking called this river something, and that it meant something. And so this process, this work of memory work, is a portal through which to reimagine where you are, how you are, and then what is possible. And again, that book is called Recovering the Sacred. It's just such a beautiful book. It opens with this very short dedication that I'll read this poem. It's a poem by Simon Ortiz from Sand Creek. And it says, "This America has been a burden of steel and mad death. But look now, there are flowers and new grass and a spring wind rising from Sand Creek." And so it's sort of asking us to confront the ways in which we've understood our reality. And and that is a long process, hopefully a process that we engage with others. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much. I too love that text in particular. I have a second question from the Q&A. Thinking about the state of the climate crisis, how do you think we can weave in concepts of blues epistemology into how we interact with bodies of water? Could this offer a way to make the space of water not just recreational, but functional and necessary?
Wow, what a beautiful question. I've been thinking about the ocean a lot, the ocean as an archive. I love the work of this just profoundly, just incredibly brilliant woman, Michaela Harrison, who I had the true pleasure to be in conversation with earlier this summer. If you search up Michaela Harrison, you see that she does what she calls Black Whale Song. What she's done is a lot of environmental justice work in Bahia, Brazil, and in the waterways around it, imagining this wake that Christina Sharp, I mentioned a few minutes ago, describes, that the present, that we are in the wake of the transatlantic slave trade, sort of imagining the wake of a ship, but also sort of this temporal wake. And so Michaela was contemplating this, and she is a singer, she is an artist. So she has embarked over the last couple of years of traveling over the oceans and doing environmental justice work with people in Brazil, but on the way they're doing this work in the water, singing, and putting a microphone down into the water and recording whales singing back. Now, why is this so profound to me? Going back to Christina Sharp in her book, again, on Blackness and Being, talked about this concept, residence time. I don't know if this is familiar or redundant, but the idea that our ancestors, those of us who are descended from survivors of the transatlantic slave trade, that many of those ancestors chose to jump ship. If they did it, chose to jump ship. And Christina Sharp in her book is trying to think through, what does it mean to have this diasporic longing where you don't know where you're from precisely, and you don't have a name, but you have a longing. And so she was trying to connect our ancestors' ever livingness in the lives of whales. She was exploring residence time, that the whale fall, the decomposition of a whale is over 2,000 years, and so thinking about the energy of our ancestors on the ocean floor together with the whales, and this very phenomenological exploration of the ocean and of our ancestors and whales, and sort of really like this embedded connection that's it's very spiritual. And so I guess my long answer to your question is, the ocean is absolutely an archive. There's a lot of beautiful work exploring the ocean as an archive, from research on critical ecologies that thinks about the microbial trace of the slave trade across the oceans, to the kind of more spiritually sonic work of someone like Michaela Harrison, who is singing, gospel inflected music, and the whales are repeating it back to her. If you search that up and you sort of do some free write journaling about how you're feeling and how it's impacting you, you might feel that experience of spatial production, that sort of blues epistemology. Again, Michaela is using the blues, sort of a Black social theory of space, to do her work, which is she is a singer, she is an artist, and she's also really committed to environmental justice. So she's bringing all of these together in this very phenomenological way, using blues epistemology and coming up with this just profound, it's hard to even describe the experience of listening to her. But anyway, I offered that as one example.
Thank you so much. And just being conscious of time and wanting to pass it over to Natanel to close off, I do want to name that one of the questions in the Q&A is, I wonder what type of group memory work could be practiced within communities and affinity groups, perhaps actively and ongoing. And I feel like your answer in regards to listening and sitting and journaling is already part of that answer. Would you add anything to that as kind of a last thought? I love that question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. I would say that no matter where you are, no matter who you are, the first step is simply to ask, where are you and how did you get there? In terms of group memory work, you might begin alone, but you'll always end up in group memory work. So if you ask yourself, how did you get to where you are? How did you get there? you will inevitably begin to engage in group memory work. And so much of that group memory work, my hope is that it'll be critical. In other words, you will feel challenged and uncomfortable because you will feel yourself rubbing up against the ways that we have collectively been conditioned to understand who we are and how we got there, how we got to be wherever it is that we are. That process, that longing, perhaps that mourning, that wake work, as Christina Sharp saying, we might find ourselves in kind of collective wake work. I mean, really, I feel that is what community-based social movement work is. It is a kind of collective wake work where we are honoring what has happened, and the impacts on us and who came before, so that we can be seeds for the future. Not in a naive hope that we can live without suffering, because that is not possible, but so that we can learn how to be as together as possible, in as right relationship as possible in this wake work, so that we can survive together. So that's what I would say is, it could be in mutual aid work that you're engaged in. It could be as simple as journaling, who am I and how did I get here? But you can't let yourself off the hook, especially if you're doing environmental justice movement work. You have to really go deep and connect yourself to the groups around you, particularly those who have been silenced by hegemonic discourse.
We get to earn the right to be hopeful, right? Through the discipline.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mia. We appreciate your time and your reflection on the questions that were posed, and all my thanks to everyone who was live with us today and folks who might be listening to this talk down the line. I do want to pass it over to Netanel Portier from the Mural Arts Institute to close us out.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Stepida. And thank you again to our interpreters. So much of what you said is just still resonating. How can we be seeds for the future and learning to be as together as possible? Just such strong, so much. There was so much. It's just a little bit. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you for the wonderful questions that folks have shared with us this evening. I'd also like to make sure that I honor the Native American House Alliance in Philadelphia. I was remiss in mentioning them earlier, and they have been working formally for some time with Mural Arts' Environmental Justice Department through the Climate Justice Initiative. And I will pop their link into the chat in a moment. Thank you all for joining us. We also, the Mural Arts Institute has a quarterly newsletter we send out with links and summaries and info connected to these conversations, as well as other work that we're doing across the country, highlighting the amazing work folks are doing. Again, reminders, this is just the kickoff to a lot of conversations happening this week. And the recordings of this event, as well as the others this week, will be available online on Mural Arts' website. We will send out an email out to folks who have registered for these events, letting you know when they're available and where exactly they're available. And we hope that you will continue to join us in these conversations. Keep up the amazing work and reflection and connection that you all are developing. Thank you so much, everyone.